Darren, have you ever heard of Power BI?
Yes, it's an awesome tool for building dashboards and so on.
It is. Did you know that it is built on top of analysis services from SQL Server?
No, I did not.
Oh yeah, that and more. That's this episode of DevRadio. Hey, and welcome. This is the next episode of Microsoft Dev Radio. I'm Jerry. I'm here with Darren.
Hello.
Darren, we've got Josh on the line. Josh, thanks for being here to talk to us about SQL Server analysis services in the cloud. Pretty exciting.
Yeah, anytime. Thanks for having me here.
All right, let's start with who you are. Josh, introduce yourself for us. And by the way, welcome back to the show.
Thank you.
It's your second time.
Guess it went well the first time.
That's right. Or we forgot. You know, we forgot. Yeah, no, we haven't.
Oh, either way, I'm here. Yeah, so I'm the principal group program manager for, it's a long story.
Here we go.
Good parts of Power BI, analysis services, and SQL Server analysis services.
Okay.
I can explain all that, how that comes together if you like.
Yeah, definitely. There's three
why
things
it's such a hard explanation. I know it's a topic about analysis services here, but analysis services had its 20th birthday this year as part of SQL Server. Yep. And about 2 years ago now, we launched it as its own Azure service. But as some people are familiar with and many aren't, Power BI has been out for the last 5 years now, and that is actually uses analysis services as its foundation. So
let's start with analysis services back in the day. I had a SQL Server on premises, and I was ready to build a data model around that I would have called a cube back in those days. And then I would be able to run, I'd point Excel at it or whatever kind of front end I had so I could do some quick pivots. And it was sub-second response time, and regardless of these massive amounts of data, because it was all pre-calculated. That was analysis services back in those days.
Yeah, in about 2008, we decided to drop the whole pre-calculated part of it. So we had multi-dimensional models, which was really the 20-year-old product. Back in, actually, it wasn't 2008, it was 2008, we came up with tabular models, but they shipped in Excel as Power Pivot for Excel.
That's right.
And then SQL 2012, they shipped as part of SQL Server. And then you get to much larger volumes of data. And with tabular models, everything's in memory. So you pre-calculate whatever you put in memory, but you don't have aggregate. You didn't necessarily have to have aggregations or all these different pre-calculated levels in there. So we just became super fast, even on large volumes of data.
Well, and it also made it so the hardware requirement was more reasonable. It used to be that you had to have the space shuttle in order to have analysis services installed.
The space shuttle plus a very powerful SAN that costs as much as the space shuttle, basically.
Yeah, that's right.
And now it's in memory, so you just need the memory.
To calculate everything.
Yeah. Yeah, within memory, you just need enough to keep it in memory. And we can scan that extremely fast.
Yeah, that's right. All right, so then I've got SQL Server on premises. I've got analysis services sitting there, and I'm doing some pivots, and everything feels good. And it was business intelligence for the masses, right? We had democratized BI for everybody, and it was beautiful, and it was fantastic. And then the cloud was born, and then all of a sudden, things started changing. Tell us about the next step in the evolutionary story here.
Oh man, it was just one step. So yeah,
and then it all went to the cloud. All right,
it all went to the cloud. Everything's done. There's so much you have to do when you're on premise. You have a whole bunch of you own your servers. You don't just own the application. You're in charge of taking updates. You're in charge of even testing those updates, seeing how they affect your existing applications.
Yeah.
The cloud just makes things so much simpler. And I always tell someone when they ask me about sizing, which server do I pick? I'm like, well, you can sit here, read all these white papers, or just go try it. Yeah. If it doesn't work, scale it up. Go to Azure, get Azure Analysis Services, get a server, try it out. If you need more power, go up. If you need less power, go down. You couldn't do that before. You had to buy a server. You had to get someone to stick it in a rack. You had to basically, plan it 6 months in advance, make sure you had the budget for it. And the cloud just changes all that. And it's elastic. you have these different work usage patterns throughout the week. Mondays are very busy. Tuesdays are somewhat
That's
busy,
right.
and then trails
You
off
got
throughout
2
the
weeks of
week.
Christmas vacation. You can shut the whole thing down.
Yeah, scale in, scale out, keep it alive for the one person who needs it during that time, and you have much more elasticity. Nothing's set in stone. The planning it can be so much less because you can make mistakes, you can make changes, and you can kind of start over without it being a whole.
In the Azure world, we have a couple of extra things that we didn't have on premises. So I would always have analysis services sitting on top of SQL Server, but now we have SQL Data Warehouse. We didn't have that as an option. How does analysis services? What does it prefer? Data Warehouse or SQL Server?
Well, there's going to be a common answer. It all depends.
Yeah.
For in a lot of cases, data warehouse serves its own purpose. And in fact, most cases serves its own purpose. Then there are some cases where you are using, let's say, SQL Server as a way to stage data just to put it into analysis services. So if you're doing that, I actually even say skip the SQL Server altogether and just go right to Blob Store or something like that and read the data in from there.
Yeah.
If you're not going to have users access that data directly in the SQL DB at all, don't worry about it. And I'd say something, use DW for what its strengths are, use SQL for what its strengths are. There's usually a
and let's just pause for a second to help people who may not be familiar. So if I was looking at DW, right, that's relational data that's non-transactional. That's a great way to think about it, right? And it's big.
Yeah, it's massively parallelized. It's not for OLTP. It's for large volumes of data. If you don't have large volumes of data, maybe not necessarily the best thing for you. Okay. Maybe not necessarily the worst thing for you. Again, it depends on what you're doing.
Depends on how you define large, I suppose, too.
Yeah.
Yeah, somewhere in the SQL recommendations, they define what large is to them and say, hey, use this one for this and use that one for that. But with DW, yeah, you can crunch through massive amounts of data very quickly. Now, with analysis services, again, you're putting everything in memory, you're putting everything in the cache. So at runtime, queries aren't necessarily hitting the data warehouse. All you have to really worry about is refreshing the data.
I see.
And there are some differences in how SQL refreshes versus how data warehouse refreshes in terms of pulling massive amounts of data out through a T-SQL query. In general, they're pretty close. Where I think some of the differences start to come in is when you're doing high computation on larger volumes of data. And also if you're doing our other mode of storage, which is called direct query, where we don't actually store anything. We actually send all the queries down to the database underneath.
Yeah.
And in those cases, there are some interesting things to think about. A lot of people would use direct query when the data was too large to put into memory, or they need instant data freshness. But there's a cost there. There's a reason you use a cache. Because you want data to be very fast. If you're using tools like Power BI, you're using tools like Excel pivot tables, you're pulling things in there, you're expecting results to come right back. If you have lots of users doing that, you have lots of visuals on a page in a Power BI report, or lots of different slices in an Excel, or cube value formulas in Excel, you're sending lots and lots of different queries, even from a single user. And having that cache there really takes that load off of your underlying database. And gives you that performance that you need. But it does mean you have to extract some data, put it into that cache, and serve it from there and keep it up to date. But that's where it is. Sorry, go ahead.
That's the trade-off that you're going to make between those.
That's the trade-off. Is it's latency versus performance versus cost. There's always those kind of three knobs you play with. Now those knobs are always kind of one versus the other. In terms of direct query, all direct query or all cached. That's the way it is for analysis services. But one thing we didn't touch on as we were talking about this cloud evolution is we did release Power BI.
Yeah, now explain that, because here I'm talking to you about analysis services, but when I look at you in the org chart, it says Power BI. So there's something going on there.
Yeah, it is all one team, and it's almost all one product. It's the actual foundation of Power BI is analysis services. So if you're in the Power BI desktop and you are importing data into a data model there, or creating relationships, or creating a DAX query or DAX a measure, you open up Task Manager, you'll see the actual SQL Server MSM DSRV process running in there, which is if you go to your SQL Server after you install it, you'll see the same thing running there if Analysis Services is running. It's literally the same code, same engine. And now it's running locally on your machine when you have Power BI Desktop. When you actually go ahead and save that file, you actually take internally inside that local engine, we go and actually take a backup, like you would if you were on a server. And that gives us a backup file, and that's encoded inside that PBIX file. And then when you actually go and publish that to Power BI, something goes and extracts that file and runs it on an Analysis Services server in our infrastructure that you don't actually see.
It's awesome.
It's just magic.
That's always been there. What we've started to do more recently is open up.
It's open. That's what it is.
Yeah, I love it.
Yeah, it's always been there, but we haven't given you. It's the same engine. It's got the same power. We haven't given you access to all that power. We haven't given you access to all the functionality.
Yeah.
Haven't given access to all the same sizes that it supports. So we've been in the process of opening that up. We've let you. Power BI used to only be able to do 1 gig. It was your max file size. We've upped that to about 10 gig. We're getting ready to pretty soon just take the limit off. Analysis Services, as you kind of mentioned, is used by more than just Power BI. It's used by Excel. It's used by Tableau. It's used by other tools. I'm losing track of time, but maybe it was about a month ago, we launched the same connectivity that Analysis Services has now in Power BI. So you can connect to Power BI workspaces as if they were AS servers from any of those tools. Yeah. So you can really start to use it like it's your AS server now. And
it really is becoming a single product, just like you said.
Yeah, and our goal is to make it not only equivalent to AS, so you don't have to buy both.
Yeah.
We want to make it actually a superset. So we are adding things to it as well too. So we were talking about direct query versus import before. We've recently added functionality that lets you now mix the two, and mix the two on the same table on the same data. So for example, if you have a really large amount of data that's too big to put in memory, but you want to make all that data available, you can leave that in, say, Data Warehouse or Spark or wherever you want to put it, and then you can put an aggregate form of that in memory in Power BI.
Awesome.
And then queries that can use the aggregation will use the aggregation. Everything else will then go and hit the underlying data source to get the data. So you can really start to balance those two. So that was one thing when we were talking about Data Warehouse before.
Does it change the aggregate setup as you start doing it to recognize that users are using that data and pull it in for the next time?
Not today, but we do love taking feedback and doing new features. If that's one thing Power BI is known for, it's that. So keep voting those up on the ideas.powerbi site, and that's definitely something we want to do.
Yeah.
Right now, you basically go and you say, okay, I want these fields aggregated, and aggregate them, and you put them in the cache. But automatically, when a query comes in, we'll decide where to send it to. And those aggregates can be in memory. They can also be other direct query tables in your data source or in other data sources too. So you can even mix and match things. This kind of brings us back to, you were talking about Data Warehouse before. Data Warehouse, those massively parallelized systems like Data Warehouse, like some of the non-Microsoft ones out there, they all can do really well on queries that come in. They throw a lot of resources up there, and what that tends to mean is you have a parallelization problem when you have lots of queries coming in. So I know Data Warehouse used to only allow you to run 32 queries at once. I think they're at 64 now. Might be higher. I haven't been up to speed on everything, but at some point you start to hit a parallelization limit, and that's what we saw when people would put Power BI in direct query mode or Analysis Services in direct query mode. Data Warehouse.
To the limit,
saturated. You killed it. And with AGS now, you can make it so that your most common queries will actually go ahead and hit the cache.
I see.
And then for the stuff that really needs to go to Data Warehouse, it can go to Data Warehouse and it won't be saturated at that point. It can answer it with good performance still.
Talk to us.
Really mix and match.
Talk to us for just a second on how big is big. What have you seen as far as that is crazy big?
Okay, so big is different to every single person. There are people who will come in with a 10 gig model and tell me how massive it is, and then to some people it really is. So we've done demos now, and some of them are online with a petabyte of data.
Yeah. And are you still able to get, what kind of response time are you still able to get with data that size?
Well, it's kind of like a magic trick a little bit too, because you are getting instant sub-second response times, but you're hitting aggregation, so you are actually hitting a smaller set of data.
Yeah.
But to an end user, it looks like you have all the data available to you,
That's
and
right.
it's all extremely fast. And when you do go to these detailed queries, a lot of these MPP systems are very good at those types of queries. And they're not being hammered with the queries they're not so great at. There's tiny little summary queries that
And if I do a drill in,
scan everything but
that's the
returning
one.
a couple of rows.
That's right.
So you can actually get good balance of performance there too. Also, it's a way of controlling costs a little bit there too. So sometimes you're willing to trade off some performance to save a little money. So you kind of have those knobs to control yourself.
So how much of your sort of features and direction are being influenced by the sort of influx of data related to IoT, and obviously Azure's strategy around the IoT, data storage, telemetry processing, those sorts of things?
We have a lot of that coming in. We did something in Power BI a few years back around being able to push data to us, and we kind of stream in. What I've kind of found in more of the enterprise scenarios is really IoT ends up being more of a big data problem.
Mm-hmm.
They want to land it, they want to transform it, with the exception of the operational cases. But for more of the kind of the business intelligence reporting cases, it tends to be more historical looking. So they need to land it, they need to transform it, they need to get into a format that can then be consumed in reports, but it tends not to be as much of that streaming. It tends not to be as much of a streaming problem as it is a big data problem, because you're landing all these things every few seconds. It's just a lot of data. You have to aggregate it and bring it into something that can be used without losing too much fidelity of the data. The operational cases definitely do come in a lot. And this new hybrid method I was talking about, where you can do some stuff in direct query and some stuff in cache, actually lets you do some neat tricks where you can have your most recent data in direct query and your older data in cache, and that way, hey, there's no processing. Everything's always up to date as data lands, and someone runs a query, they'll see it show up. But there are some features in Power BI that actually do handle you streaming it directly in, and it's still a place of active development.
Cool. The what do you see as far as the change of the type of users that over time? Like when I was all analysis services, man, it was a special type of business analyst. You know what I mean? That really had to understand bids, remember bids and all this stuff like that. What's the experience today?
We still have a lot of that. But I think when we start to go and engage with new customers, there's a bigger expectation that some of these things are just going to work for you. Analysis services, you have to automate a lot of things yourself. I think this is also not someone's necessarily primary role. They have to work with a lot of technology sometimes to make these solutions happen, or they're sometimes more on the business side than they are on the IT side. So the skill sets tend to be a little bit different. So with Power BI, we definitely are trying to lower that bar a little bit. So it's not necessarily the same thing. It's not as difficult to get started and get these really important and used to be complex solutions to get to be running. So like incremental refresh is a good example of this. If you're doing this in analysis services, other than manually going into SQL Server Management Studio and creating partitions every single day and processing them, there's no way to incrementally load data into analysis services without writing code.
Yeah.
Power BI, we made this policy driven. So you can define, and a little bit data driven too. So you can go ahead and define policies for a table of how it should be loaded. It can even check the data and look for changes. And all you do is you schedule it to start at some point. There's a built-in schedule in Power BI and it just runs.
If I'm a Power BI user and I have the data locally, that could be a pretty big chunk of data that I've got locally. I've got to be careful as soon as I start using the data connector, because the data connector is what allows that. Is the data connector an important part?
We always use a connector no matter what data we're talking to.
Okay.
Now if you said locally, you mean like behind a firewall under your desk?
Yeah, or just on my laptop sort of thing.
Yeah, so if you're taking data from a data store that's like say behind your firewall, not in the cloud, we have our gateway that lets you kind of proxy through both of those. But the incremental refresh part is a little bit different. I mean, you have say a large fact table, you have a bunch of data in there that's been accumulating over time. All right, you did a one-time load of that, now you have everything up until the point you loaded it. Now tomorrow new data comes in. All right, well, you don't want to reload everything again, you want to just load the new data. And the next day new data comes in, and you go and do the same thing. Okay, now the next day new data comes in, but there was a mistake 3 weeks ago, and now a couple of those days have changed. Now you need to go change, rerun those older days and bring in the new stuff, right?
Yeah.
So it was a lot of code to write. So the refresh policies are meant to automatically kind of detect some of those things and rerun those for you, so you don't have to write the code to do it.
I mean, meanwhile, the user has no idea how easy life has been made for them because it just happens.
Yeah. I know.
My dashboard is updated.
Good part of my resume is now gone.
Even if you put it on there, nobody would be able to appreciate it because they don't even see it happening because it's
They'll appreciate when they needed it. Yeah. And with the analysis services case, I mean, there are a lot of people who know this stuff very well. There are a lot of people who learn it, and then there are a lot of people who get hired by people to go do it for them.
Because analysis services is such a hardware expense especially for companies who have a large amount of data. Do you find a lot of people do a hybrid match where they're putting analysis services in the cloud, but they still have their data locally?
What we see a lot is that people will put, if they already have SQL Server analysis services on-prem, they will oftentimes just keep that on-prem and use the gateway with Power BI, just kind of proxy it through. There's not much advantage, I would say, to. Well, actually, let me take that back a little bit more. So yes, we do see people putting even Azure Analysis Services models into Azure Analysis Services and leaving the data source on-prem, but they will then import it from on-prem to the cloud. There's not much value in doing like the direct query to the on-prem unless it's a normal direct query case and you just don't want to move it to the cloud.
Yeah.
But it doesn't buy you too much. So yeah, I mean, we do offer all those different combinations. You can keep your AS on-prem. You can put your AS in the cloud. You can keep your data on-prem and proxy it into AS, or you can put that in the cloud too. Right? We offer all those. I think right now there's a pretty good mix of things going on.
So maybe the mix you see the most is because data is so large. I have a massive data lake or whatever, and I'm using AS in locally. I'm using that on-prem because I can't afford all this storage and making it all reliable. Is that?
I wouldn't say that. There's not storage. So for analysis services, it's generally about memory. We usually get roughly a 10x compression. I don't know, somewhere between 5 and 15. I always like to land on the 10x. It really depends on your data. Depends how you look at cost. So either way, if you're going to put it in analysis services, you're buying a server, whether it's an Azure Analysis Services server or an on-prem server. The cost model is a little bit different. You have an OpEx versus CapEx cost. Usually you don't take exactly what you have in a data lake and put it into analysis services cache. It's usually
just
more
than you need. Structured.
It's not a cache at that point too. It's now basically a data warehouse. And you're usually gearing that model or models to the business user use cases. So oftentimes you'll see, especially with larger volumes of data, you'll see people create multiple models.
Yeah.
Geared at different scenarios. And that way everything stays small, fast, easy to, small, fast also equals cheap, and easy to keep updated and it gives a good end user experience.
Okay, I think that's all three of the possible scenarios that we talked through there. Good. Now, if I'm using Power BI today, I can use as a data source Azure Data Explorer as well. What's the relationship with the Azure Data Explorer?
With Azure Data Explorer and Power BI?
Yeah.
Can you talk to that one more time?
So if I use Azure Data Explorer today, right, I can point it at, I don't know, my lake or whatever, create the views on top of those, and then I can access all of that through, analysis services, since they're the same product in a way, right?
Got it. So you were saying, Data Studio or Data Explorer, you use that to create your lake. Yes, then you can connect Power BI or analysis services to the data lake to pull that data. Absolutely.
Yeah. That's
right. From where I sit in the stack, or parts of the product sit in the stack, we're a bit agnostic to some of that stuff. We like to be the semantic model, the semantic layer, and the semantic layer doesn't have to really care about the physical layer, or at least supposed to not to, because your business users don't really care about the physical layer. They do when it doesn't perform well, but typically they don't need to care about the physical layer. And usually the physical layer is not something friendly enough for them to even understand or look at or try to reason about. So the semantic model is kind of that lens that takes whatever is in the in your data warehouse or in your data lake, and just kind of translates it into something that a business user can easily use.
Got it.
And at that point,
once it's formatted so it can be consumed, that's why Power BI is suddenly reading it.
Yeah, that's when an end user is reading it. Now, Power BI has below where my parts of the product sit in the stack, there's the kind of connector layer, and there's a whole team that drives our different connectors, and they do their best to make it as transparent to a user building a model as possible. So we have what we call our Power Query language, or Power Query M language, which no matter what data source you're on, it's the same language, same UI, and then we kind of translate it into the physical queries underneath when we go ahead and process. Or
if my enterprise is already invested in analysis services and we like it, right? We've been using it for a long time, and now we're deciding to go to the cloud. What's the experience that I have? Is this a one-for-one parity and everything's cool, or is there something I need to know?
Azure Analysis Services for tabular is pretty much a one-to-one parity. There's always something different, just because you're in different environments. And you said for
tabular, and just to be clear, tabular is probably what the on-premises guys are referring to as a cube that they've created.
Well, going back to the beginning, we had two different model types. There's tabular models and multidimensional models. So cube is typically referred to as the multidimensional models. And some people use it for everything, and I occasionally do too. But tabular models is what Azure Analysis Services currently supports. It's still on our list to get multidimensional in there. But right now, the best answer for multidimensional models in Azure is still IaaS.
Okay, so IaaS being a VM running analysis service,
which is absolutely a 100% compatibility.
Yeah, no doubt about it. So if I good, I'm glad we talked about that part then, because sometimes tabular is all I ever used, right? And everything's easier that way, frankly. And if I go to a multidimensional model, then I need to just recognize this isn't one for one yet, but it's probably on your backlog.
Yeah, definitely is. I mean, it's something that we would love to get to very soon.
So when I've been working with Power BI, I've noticed on the web UI there's kind of the preview perspective of the tooling, as well as there's been some data sources and data connectors that have been in preview. What's kind of the roadmap for some of these features?
Generally, if a feature's ready to go, when the moment we're done with it, we'll put it right to general availability. And then there's certain features that we want to get some feedback on before we commit to never changing them again. We can always improve them, but changing some of the fundamentals. So typically we'll release some of those in preview. Like right now, the aggregation feature I talk about is in preview because one of the things it's lacking right now is row level security, which the rest of Analysis Services supports. But we wanted to get some better feedback on how RLS should work in this use cases. So it's not there, and it's currently in preview. And actually, when we release some of these things, we might break some small scenarios. Like we would never do that on a GA feature. So a lot of times they'll go there, not because we're telling you not to use it. It's because we want to get your feedback from it, and then we want to bake it into the final version and release it GA. So anything in preview is intended to be GA. And just matters of what kind of feedback we get and how much work we have to do after we get that feedback is how long it takes to go GA.
Okay, cool. For the most part, users are in love with Power BI. I mean, that's my experience.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And it's been a great ride too. I mean, we launched actually Power BI for the second time. Not most people realize that, which is why we launched it for the second time. We went from kind of starting over on that same kind of base with Analysis Services there, and to where we are today. It's been a long 5 years, but it's been a fun 5 years, and it's great to see the actual reaction from the product. Really starting out being very bare bones to where it is now, and how excited people get when they use it.
Yeah, and you see it everywhere now. I mean, it's integrated with almost all of our products. It's integrated with the Azure portal. It's integrated with, if almost any product you can mention, you can find Power BI somehow snuck in there.
It's like we had a plan. We were doing something during those 5 years.
Yeah, all the sleeper agents were getting placed.
Exactly.
Cool. Well, listen, Josh, it's the idea of analysis services in the first place, in order to be able to do this sort of work on top of massive amounts of data, is unbelievable having this cool experience in Power BI so that I can manipulate it without having to have a super expert come in and be able to still be able to deliver the dashboards or just simple reports that make sense to users. It's brilliant. It's absolutely brilliant.
Yeah, we're simplifying it, bringing all the end-to-end together, so you don't have to jump through all these different hoops just to get some visuals working too. So I mean, it's 20 years, but it's just the beginning. Put it that way.
It's 20 years, but it's just the beginning. The 20th anniversary of Analysis Services.
Crazy.
Man, thanks for being on the call today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
I appreciate it. We'll talk to you again.